You are listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
No guns, no wars, no hatefulness. Just a victory dance, I'll never taste defeat. Where there's nothing done or said that can't be forgiven. Every step you take is on sacred ground. Walk away from death to the land of the living.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Wednesday night edition of the Intrepid radio program with me, your host, Scotty Roberts. You're listening on Odyssey Radio Network. And that, if you want to go hear the audio version of this show, click on ODYSY1.com, Odyssey1.com. And if you'd like to see the simulcast, the broadcast in video over on my YouTube channel, just go to youtube.com and go to Mr. Scotty Roberts. That's M-I-S-T-E-R spelled out, Mr. Scotty Roberts. And look down below. You're going to see over on the YouTube channel a like button. I want you to hit the like button for me, if you will. And if you are subscribed, of course, you'll see that. If you are not subscribed, I'm not even sure if you're seeing this over on YouTube, but come over and subscribe to my channel. And click on the little bell, and that should give you alerts as to when I go live. And I go live at 9 o'clock Central Standard Time, Monday through Friday. That would be 10 o'clock, of course, East Coast time, or 7 o'clock p.m. on the West Coast. And so there you go. If you want to catch me roughly 9 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 10 o'clock, not even roughly, on the spot. So come and see us live, subscribe to my channel, and hit the like button on your way out. You can also look at the little scrolling bar right there below my screen, and you'll see ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's where you find all my stuff. Everything there is to know about me, you can get to through that website. You can go to IntrepidRadio.com and see what's going on over there. And you can also check out StreamingTalkRadio.com. That's Rocky Stucci's site that we're all kind of a part of, all of us who are friends, and we all do this stuff together. So that's in theory anyway, and you can find us there, and all the links to all of our stuff. And remember, if you need any design work done, logo design, illustration, book design, book interiors, book jackets, book covers, anything graphically related that you would plug into the category of graphic design, of advertising, of marketing, I'm your man. Come over and see me at ScottAllenRoberts.com. You can get all my contact information there. And thanks for listening. Thanks for being here tonight. So we left off yesterday. We were talking about this whole series that I've been talking about with Native America I was focusing on the ghost dance and on Wovoka. And we really haven't gotten to that point yet where we're focusing directly on him and what he did, but we've been giving a little background history that has led up to why the ghost dance started, why Wovoka came into play, which leads to, of course, the last massacre, if you will, of the subjugation of the Native American peoples, which took place in 1890 at Wounded Knee. And so this is where we're heading tonight. I don't even know why I said in there. I know exactly what I'm thinking and what I'm going to say. So we're going to get back into this, and we're still in a little bit of the build-up to Wovoka. But we ended yesterday with Sitting Bull walking out of the council meeting, and he was asked how the Indians felt about giving up their lands because they'd been basically swindled out of their property that had been given to them by treaty because the U.S. government wanted their land for expansion westward. And Indians, said Sitting Bull, and this is where we ended yesterday, there are no Indians left but me. And that was his position. So in the drying grass moon, which is October, and it was the specific date is October 9th, 1890, about a year after the breaking up of the Great Reservation, the Sioux Reservation, that we've been talking about, Aminikaju Sioux from the Cheyenne River Agency came to Standing Rock to visit Sitting Bull. His name was Kicking Bear. And he brought news of the Paiute Messiah, Wovoka, who had founded the religion of the ghost dance. And Kicking Bear and his brother-in-law, Short Bull, had returned from a long journey beyond the Shining Mountains in search of the Messiah. And hearing of this pilgrimage, Sitting Bull had sent for Kicking Bear in order to learn more about the ghost dance. And this is a good time for me to remind you, too, the song that I play at the beginning of these shows and that has been part of my intro for a long time is the song Ghost Dance, and it was written by Bill Miller, and Native American artist, Grammy Award-winning Native American artist. And he gave me his personal permission to use that song for my shows a long time ago, like 10 years ago. So that's what that song is about, the Ghost Dance, his interpretation of it. And so Kicking Bear, when he met with Sitting Bull, had told him of how a voice had commanded him to go forth and meet the ghosts of the Indians who were to return and inhabit the earth. This is go to your ancestors, go to the ghosts of those who have died and those who were slain, and they will inhabit the earth. And on the cars of the iron horse, the train, he and Short Bull and 9 other Sioux had traveled far toward the place where the sun sets, to the west, and traveled until the train stopped. And there they were met by 2 Indians they had never seen before, but who greeted them as brothers and gave them meat and bread. They supplied the pilgrims with horses, and they rode for 4 suns, so 4 days, and until they came to a camp of fish eaters, the Paiutes, and near Pyramid Lake in Nevada. And so they rode the train all the way out west, and then they rode inland on horseback to Nevada, to Pyramid Lake. And the fish eaters told the visitors that Christ had returned to the earth again. Christ must have sent them to come there. And Kicking Bear said it was foreordained. To see the Messiah, they had to make another journey to the agency at Walker Lake. And for 2 more days, Kicking Bear and his friends waited at Walker Lake with hundreds of other Indians, speaking in dozens of different dialects and tongues, Native American tongues. And these Indians had come from many reservations to see this man being called the Messiah of the Native American peoples. And we're not talking about links to Mormonism here and things like that. That's something we'll do in another show. I think it was Anton. I'm sorry, Anton. Anton, I keep calling you Anton. I have a friend who spells his name the same way, uses the long O. So Anton suggested we talk about that. Maybe we will in the near future here. So just before sundown on the 3rd day, the Christ appeared. This is what they called him, the Christ, the Messiah. And the Indians made a big fire to throw light on him. And Kicking Bear had always thought that Christ was a white man, like the missionaries. But this man looked like an Indian. And after a while he rose and spoke to the waiting crowd. He said, "I have sent for you and am glad to see you. I'm going to talk to you after a while about your relatives who are dead and gone. My children, I want you to listen to all I have to say to you. I will teach you how to dance a dance, and I want you to dance it. Get ready for your dance, and when the dance is over, I'll talk to you." And then he commenced to dance, and everybody joined in, the Christ singing while they danced, and they danced the dance of ghosts, the ghost dance, until late at night. And when the Messiah told them they had danced enough, then they all stopped. And the next morning, Kicking Bear and the others went up close to the Messiah to see if he had the scars of crucifixion in his hands and in his feet, and the spear thrust in his side. And the missionaries on the reservation had told them about how Jesus Christ bore those scars. There was a scar on his wrist and one on his face, but they could not see his feet because he was wearing moccasins. And throughout the day he talked to them. And in the beginning he said, God made the earth, and then sent the Christ to earth to teach the people. But white men had treated him badly, leaving scars on his body, and so he had gone back to heaven. Now he had returned to earth as an Indian, and he was to renew everything as it used to be and make it so much better. Now, let me ask you a question, too. If somebody came to you and said he was the Christ, reincarnated, what would you think? Remember, these are different times. It's about 150 years ago. Not quite. 130 years ago. With the rise of Wovoka. And this man, I've done enough study about Jesus and the philosophies behind him and different teachings to understand that there was a point in his life where he probably understood that he was to be the Messiah. That is by Christian religion. It's not like he was a newborn and 8 months old, had all the knowledge of God in his head. He grew up and he came to an understanding of who he was. According to, if you're a believer in that and you look into Jesus and the life of Jesus, that is one way to understand what he was teaching and how he came to a knowledge of who he was. Now, in the next springtime, when the grass was knee-high, the earth would be covered with new soil which would bury all the white men. And the new land would be covered with sweet grass, running water, trees. Great herds of buffalo and wild horses would come back, and the Indians who danced the ghost dance would be taken up in the air and suspended there, while a wave of the new earth was passing, and then they would be set down among the ghosts of their ancestors on the new earth, and only Indians would live and live through this. And this is what Wovoka was teaching them. Now, false Messiah? Probably. But what kind of spiritual acumen did Wovoka have? Nobody really knows that much about him. But he presented himself saying he was the Christ, the new incarnation. If he truly believed that himself, was he just like a Tony Robbins, doing his positive motivational speech to the Native Americans, we will rise again, put your heart in it, love each other, and so on, which is what he taught. He wasn't teaching them to rise up against the white man. He was teaching them all about inner strength, inner love, inner peace, and so on. And so who's to say he wasn't connected somehow? Maybe he was. So after a few days at Walker Lake, Kicking Bear and his friends learned how to dance the ghost dance. And they mounted their horses, they returned to the railroad, and as they rode along, the Messiah flew above them in the air, according to Kicking Bear, teaching them songs for the new dance. And at the railroad, he left them, telling them to return to their people and teach them what they had learned. And when the next winter was past, he would bring the ghosts of their fathers to meet them in a new resurrection. Now, Kicking Bear and the others that are telling this and relating this story to Sitting Bull, did they really experience that? Did they experience the euphoria of believing something new, of finding hope that they would revive their people? That they would resurrect the Native American culture? And that they would wipe out, and that something miraculous would happen to wipe the white man off of their land, off of the earth. And did they believe that? And in that euphoria, they come up with songs and stuff like that. They say, is that what they meant by the spirit of the Messiah, of Wovoka, was flying above them, teaching them songs? I don't know. Were they just making shit up? Don't know that either. I think these were guys enraptured by the euphoria of this hope that they were being given to believe by Wovoka. And after returning to Dakota, Kicking Bear had started the new dance at the Cheyenne River. Short Bull had brought it to the Rosebud Reservation, and others were introducing it at Pine Ridge. and Bigfoot's band of the Minneconjous, Chief Bigfoot, not Sasquatch. So Kicking Bear said, and he said, what he said, it was made up mostly of women who had lost husbands or other male relatives in fights with the long hair and the 3 stars and the bear coat, and they danced until they fainted because they wanted to bring their dead warriors back to life. They believed in this resurrection that Kicking Bear and Short Bull and the others were starting to teach them. And so Sitting Bull listened to all of this stuff coming from these guys. He listened to Kicking Bear, what he had to relate about the Messiah and the ghost dance. And Kicking Bull really didn't believe in the resurrection. He didn't believe it was possible for dead men to return and live again. But his people had heard of this Messiah and were fearful he would pass them by and let them disappear when this new resurrection came. So there was a superstition that kicked in with this as well. And it played to that. And remember, what you're dealing with here is a conquered people, a people who had lost everything, a people who were subjugated at the hands of the government. And they had nothing. Apparently had nothing but hope. And this is the time, we've seen it in crisis, even in Christianity and other religions, and we see the hope is sprung eternal and revives itself. We revive ourselves with hope when we are in dire circumstances. And I think this is a lot of what was going on. And they were afraid that the resurrection would pass them by unless they joined in the dancing. And so Sitting Bull had no real objections. He didn't really appropriate this personally, but he didn't have any objections to his people dancing the ghost dance. But he'd heard that the agents at some of the reservations were bringing soldiers in to stop the ceremonies. Imagine that. You've got these people who are dancing a dance of hope, and you've got the agencies bringing in soldiers to try to get them to stop doing that. They didn't even want them to have hope. Now, I'm sure they thought maybe this would lead to something else. I get that. But Sitting Bull didn't want the soldiers coming to frighten the people and perhaps even shoot at the people, kill them. And so Kicking Bear replied that if the Indians wore the sacred garments of the Messiah, the ghost shirts painted with magic symbols, no harm would come to them. And not even the bullets of the Blue Coats' guns could penetrate a ghost shirt. And remember Crazy Horse, back before the battle of the Little Bighorn, the Greasy Grass, where Custer was killed, which was about roughly 15 to 20 years before this. He believed that God, the Great Spirit, gave him protection and that bullets could not hurt him or any of his warriors that fought with him. And he lived through that. And so they had a spiritual belief behind this. So wear the ghost shirt with the special symbols painted, and no bullets would harm you. And this would be your protection against the soldiers perhaps trying to stop you. So with some skepticism, Sitting Bull invited Kicking Bear to remain with his band at Standing Rock and to teach them the dance of the ghosts. And this was in the moon of falling leaves. And so you're looking at November-ish right in there. And across the West on almost every Indian reservation, the ghost dance was spreading like wildfire. And it agitated the Indian Bureau inspectors. The Army officers from the Dakota to Arizona were getting really worried about this. From Indian Territory, which was in the Dakotas and the Central Plains, down to Nevada. And they were worried about this, and they were trying to fathom the meaning of it, the whites. And by early autumn, the official word was stop the ghost dancing. Put an end to it, was the official word from the U.S. government. And so, McLaughlin, remember him, white hair, the agency? He said, a more pernicious system of religion could not have been offered to a people who stood on the threshold of civilization. And although he was a practicing Catholic himself, McLaughlin, like most other agents, didn't recognize the ghost dance as being entirely Christian, except for a difference in rituals. Its tenets were the same as those of the Christian church. This is the Messiah. What do you do with that? And so you must not hurt anybody or do harm to anyone. You must not fight. Do right always is what Wovoka, their Messiah, taught them. Do right all the time. He preached nonviolence and brotherly love. And the doctrine called for no action by the Indians except to dance and to sing. And the Messiah would bring the resurrection. So this is all Wovoka was teaching. The whites had a problem with it. And you know what that is? I think it's guilt-driven, too. You look at what they did to subjugate these people, to conquer them, and you get the idea. You start getting a movement like that spreads through a conquered people, what's going to happen next? So they feared this. But because the Indians were dancing, the agents alarmed and notified the soldiers, and the soldiers began to march. And they started moving in on the reservations. And a week after Kicking Bear came to Standing Rock Reservation to teach Sitting Bull's people the ghost dance, Whitehair McLaughlin set a dozen Indian police to remove him from the reservation by force. And awed by Kicking Bear's aura of holiness, the policeman referred McLaughlin's order to Sitting Bull, but the chief refused to take action. And on October 16th, McLaughlin's order to Sitting Bull, McLaughlin sent a larger force of police, and this time Kicking Bear was escorted off the reservation. Even the police saw what they called the holiness of Kicking Bear. Now, the following day, McLaughlin notified the Commissioner of Indian Affairs that the real power behind the pernicious system of religion at Standing Rock was Sitting Bull. He said Sitting Bull's the one responsible for this. Remember, Sitting Bull didn't really believe it, but he let it happen because he thought it was good for the people. And he recommended that the chief be arrested, removed from the reservation, and confined to a military prison. And the commissioner conferred with the Secretary of War, and they decided that this is what they would have to do to prevent any further trouble. And by mid-November of that year, ghost dancing was so prevalent in the Sioux reservations that almost all other activities came to a halt. No pupils appeared at the schoolhouses. The trading stores were empty. No work was done on the little farms. At Pine Ridge, the frightened agent telegraphed Washington, quote, he said, "Indians are dancing in the snow and are wild and crazy. We need protection, and we need it now. And the leaders should be arrested and confined at some military post until the matter is quieted, and this should be done at once." And so this is what was going on. This is the movement that started to spread. And their Messiah, Wovoka, it was all pacifist. It was all nonviolent. It was all love your brother. Do not attack anyone. Do not fight anyone. Stay at peace and dance. And that's where we're going to end it for this first segment. We got to go out to break. I'll be gone for 2 minutes, and I'll be right back. Sit tight. Folks, thank you for coming back. Thanks for sitting here throughout the break and waiting. This is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on Odyssey Radio Network, and that is odyssey1.com. ODYSY 1.com. You can also view the simulcast in video over on my YouTube channel, Mr. Scotty Roberts, Mr. spelled out. And you can go over to intrepidradio.com, learn more about us. Look at the scrolling message down below. You'll see my personal website, scottallenroberts.com. Find out all about me, what I do, etc. Now let's move on. Let's get into this. We left off with the ghost dance spreading throughout all of the reservations, the Sioux reservations, and all the way from the Dakotas, where you got Rosebud and Pine Ridge and Standing Rock, all the way down to Nevada. And so you've got all these tribes are just immersed in the message of their new Messiah. And the confusion to the whites was that they had adapted Christian religion, which was the religion of the whites, to their Native American religion with Wovoka, claiming he was the new Messiah, the resurrection of the Messiah, a new incarnation of the Messiah, come to the Native American peoples with a message, a pacifistic message of love, brotherhood, love your enemies. God will wipe out the evil of the white race that they had brought, and restore their lands and restore their tribes, and the ghosts of all their dead would rise if they only danced the ghost dance and sang. And so this is what everybody started doing. This was the great hope of a defeated people who had nothing left. Everything had been taken from them, and that which was given to them by the conquerors was slowly being swindled away from them as well. So, a Short Bull, who was with Kicking Bear, who had met Wovoka, this Messiah, and was spreading this message, he led a band of his believers down the White River, into the Badlands of the Dakotas. And in a few days, their numbers swelled to more than 3,000 people. And these 3,000 people disregarded the wintry weather. They donned their ghost dance shirts with the symbols painted on them that would protect them from harm, protect them from the white man's and the white military's bullets. And they danced from each dawn far into the nights. So in a way, they had kind of this religious council going on amongst themselves. And they were dancing, and this is how hopeful these people were. They abandoned everything to dance the ghost dance, because it would eradicate the evil that had been done to them, raise the ghosts of their dead, and it would restore the earth to what it once was, before the white man had come. And so all their hope was buried into this. Now Short Bull told the dancers, "Don't fear the soldiers who come to the ceremonies. Their horses will sink into the earth," he said. "The riders will jump from their horses, but they will sink into the earth also." That's what he told his followers. At Cheyenne River, Bigfoot's band increased to 600, mostly widows. And when the agent tried to interfere, Bigfoot took the dancers off the reservation to a sacred place on Deep Creek. And on November 20th, the Indian Bureau in Washington ordered agents in the field to telegraph the names of all the fomenters of disturbances among the ghost dancers. Now, you can see how, now what is a religious ceremony that's based on the hope of reviving their land, their people, was turned into an insidious evil that needed to be squashed. Because the whites, frankly, if you look at it from their perspective in the day, they didn't know what was possible. They didn't know if this was going to cause an armed uprising. And so a list was quickly assembled in Washington, and it was transmitted to Bearcoat Miles Army Headquarters in Chicago. Miles saw Sitting Bull's name among the fomenters and immediately assumed that he was the guy to blame for all this disturbance. Sitting Bull, who had held out for so long, like Geronimo in the south, Sitting Bull in the north. Remember when he was holed up in Canada with his band and they finally turned themselves in. So there's your scapegoat. It's Sitting Bull. Has to be Sitting Bull. And Miles knew that a forced arrest by soldiers would create trouble. He wanted Sitting Bull removed quietly. Let's just get him out of there. And to accomplish this, Bearcoat called on one of the few white men that Sitting Bull ever liked or trusted, and that was Buffalo Bill Cody. Now, Buffalo Bill agreed to visit Sitting Bull and try to persuade him to come to Chicago for a conference with Miles. And the records of this, by the way, the historical records are a little unclear as to whether or not Cody knew that if he succeeded in this mission, he would be taking Sitting Bull to a military prison. I think people lean to say they don't think he really understood that that's what was going to happen on the other end of this. So he was sent to talk to Sitting Bull, his old friend. And so when Buffalo Bill arrived at Standing Rock, he met with a very uncooperative agent. He was fearful that Cody would botch the arrest attempt and only arouse Sitting Bull's anger. And McLaughlin quickly arranged for Washington to rescind the showman's authority. And so without even seeing Sitting Bull, Cody left. He left the Standing Rock Reservation in a really bad way, a bad state of mind, bad humor, if you want to call it that, and he returned to Chicago kind of pissed off. And meanwhile, at Pine Ridge, the Army had already brought in troops, and they were creating a really tense situation between the Indians and the military. You can imagine that. They're dancing the peaceful ghost dance, and the military comes in, and they're creating quite a pent-up situation. The former agent, remember Dr. Valentine McGillicuddy? He was one of those swindlers. Was sent there to make recommendations for a reservation of to the reservation for a cessation of all these difficulties. And he said, "I should let the dance continue," McGillicuddy said. "The coming of the troops has frightened the Indians. If the Seventh-day Adventists prepare their ascension robes for the second coming of the Savior, the United States Army is not put in motion to prevent them from doing this. So why should not the Indians have the same privilege? If the troops remain, trouble is sure to come." That was actually not bad advice. And so this viewpoint, however, was not to prevail on the reservations and amongst the Indian Bureau agency workers. If the troops remain, trouble is sure to come, was what they were told. But on December 12th, Lieutenant Colonel William F. Drum, commanding troops at Fort Yates, received orders from General Miles to secure the person of Sitting Bull. Go arrest his ass, is what he was told. And call on Indian agent McLaughlin to cooperate and render such assistance as would best promote the purpose in view, is what William F. Drum, Lieutenant Colonel, ordered. So just before daybreak, on December 15th of 1890, 43 Indian police surrounded Sitting Bull's log cabin. And 3 miles away, a squadron of cavalry waited as a support force if they were needed to help arrest Sitting Bull, one man. So, Lieutenant Bullhead, the Indian policeman, and not Bullhead, it was Bullhead, the Indian policeman in charge of the party, found Sitting Bull asleep on the floor. And when he was awakened, the chief stared incredulously at Bullhead. He says, and remember, he just woke him up out of a sound sleep. Looks up. I'm sure it was like, "What the hell do you want?" And it's written down, he said, "What do you want here?" he asked. And he says, "You're my prisoner," said Bullhead. You have to go to the agency with me." And Sitting Bull yawned. And he sat up. He said, "All right," he replied. Let me put on my clothes and I'll go with you. And he asked the policeman to have his horse saddled. And when Bullhead emerged from the cabin with Sitting Bull, he found a crowd of ghost dancers gathering outside. And they outnumbered the police 4-1. So Catch the Bear, one of the dancers, moved toward Bullhead. "You think you're going to take him?" Catch the Bear shouted. "You shall not do it." This is the official report, by the way, on this. "Come now," Bullhead said quietly to his prisoner. "Don't listen to anyone." But Sitting Bull held back, making it necessary for Bullhead and Sergeant Red Tomahawk to force him toward his horse. And remember, these are Indian police that are arresting him under the orders of the American government, the Army, the United States military. And at this moment, Catch the Bear threw off his blanket and brought up a rifle. Now, he's one of the dancers. Now, he's doing something that is in conflict with what he's been taught. He's taking action. He fired at Bullhead, wounded him in the side, and as Bullhead fell hard, he tried to shoot his assailant, but the bullet struck Sitting Bull instead. Almost simultaneously, Red Tomahawk shot Sitting Bull through the head and killed him. Now, during the firing, the old show horse that Buffalo Bill had presented to Sitting Bull began to go through his tricks. He sat upright because, remember, at the sound of a gun, he would sit, and he would stand up, and he would do tricks for the Buffalo Bill Wild West show. And this was the horse that Bill Cody gave to Sitting Bull. So he sat upright, he raised one hoof, and it seemed to those who watched he was performing the dance of the ghosts. But as soon as the horse ceased his dancing and wandered away, the wild fighting resumed, and only the arrival of the cavalry detachment saved the Indian police from utter extinction. The people would have wiped them out. But this is how Sitting Bull, the famous Sitting Bull, the resistor, the one who came back, who still was a chief to his people, this is how he met his death. And so he died that day. Not only was he shot by the guy who was wounded in the rifle shot, but the other Indian police shot him through the head while he was laying there. All of these events now, everything we've talked about the last 3 days on this is all leading up to Wounded Knee, the massacre at Wounded Knee. And I want to get into that now. And hopefully we'll have enough time to cover this tonight. So, Red Cloud, one of the chiefs, said this. He said, "There was no hope on earth, and God seemed to have forgotten us. Some said they saw the Son of God. Others did not see him. If he had come, he would do some great things as he had done before. We doubted it because we had seen neither him nor his works. The people didn't know. They did not care. They snatched at the hope. They screamed like crazy men to him for mercy. They caught at the promise they heard he had made. The white men were frightened and called for soldiers. We had begged for life, and the white men thought we wanted theirs. We heard that soldiers were coming. We did not fear. We hoped that we would tell them our troubles and get help. A white man said that the soldiers meant to kill us. We didn't believe that. But some were frightened and ran away to the Badlands." That was Red Cloud. Now, had it not been for this buoyant, hopeful, sustaining force of the ghost dance and the religion that came with it, the Sioux, in their grief and anger over the assassination of Sitting Bull, might have risen up against the guns of the soldiers. Could you imagine that? The only force keeping them from uprising was the fact that they put their hope and belief in this Messiah and his words and the actions of the ghost dance. And so prevalent was their belief that the white men would soon disappear, and that the next greening of their grass after this winter, their dead relatives and friends would all return. They made no retaliations for the death of Sitting Bull. By the hundreds, however, the leaderless Hunkpapas fled from the Standing Rock Reservation. They sought refuge in one of the ghost dance camps, or with the last of the great chiefs. Red Cloud at the Pine Ridge Reservation really took refuge and encouraged his people to do nothing. In the moon, when the deer shed their horns, that's December 17th, about 100 of these fleeing Hunkpapas reached Bigfoot's Minneconjou camp near Cherry Creek. That same day, the War Department issued orders for the arrest and imprisonment of Bigfoot, the chief. He was on the list of fomenters of disturbances. So as soon as Bigfoot learned that Sitting Bull had been killed, he started his people toward Pine Ridge, hoping that Red Cloud would protect them from the soldiers. En route, he fell ill of pneumonia, and when hemorrhaging began, he had to travel on a wagon. And on December 28th, as they neared Porcupine Creek, the Minneconjou sighted 4 troops of cavalry approaching. Now, Bigfoot immediately ordered a white flag run up over his wagon. About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he raised up from his blankets to greet Major Samuel Whiteside, the 7th U.S. Cavalry. And Bigfoot's blankets were stained with blood from his lungs, and as he talked in a hoarse whisper with Whiteside, red drops fell from his nose and froze in the bitter cold. These are all reports of witnesses who were there for this. Now, outside, or Whiteside told Bigfoot that he had his orders to take him to a cavalry camp on Wounded Knee Creek. And the Minneconjou chief replied that he was going in that direction anyway, and he was taking his people to Pine Ridge for safety. And so, turning to his half-breed scout, John Shangru, Major Whiteside ordered him to begin disarming Bigfoot's band. "Look here, Major," Shangru replied. "If you do that, there's liable to be a fight here. And if there is, you'll kill all these women and children, and the men will get away from you." So Whiteside insisted that his orders were to capture Bigfoot's Indians and disarm and dismount them. "We better take them to camp and then take their horses away from them and their guns." "There," Shangru declared. "All right," Whiteside agreed. "You tell Bigfoot to move down to camp at Wounded Knee." And so the major glanced at the ailing chief, and he gave the order for his army ambulance to be brought forward. The ambulance would be warmer and would give Bigfoot an easier ride than jolting springless wagon. And after the chief was transferred to the ambulance, Whiteside formed a column for the march to Wounded Knee Creek. And 2 troops of cavalry took the lead, the ambulance and the wagon following, and the Indians herded into a compact group behind them. And the other 2 cavalry troops, with a battery of 2 Hotchkiss guns, were bringing up the rear to this whole column. So twilight was falling when the columns came over the last rise in the land and began descending the slope to Chunkpa Opi Wakpala, the creek called Wounded Knee. So there it is in the Sioux language. The Chunkpa Opi Wakpala, the creek called Wounded Knee. The wintry dusk and the tiny crystal of ice were dancing in the dying light, according to witnesses there, and added a real supernatural quality to the somber landscape. Now, by the way, I think it's a good point I just wanted to insert here. I had a good friend, still do. He's Oglala Sioux. Grew up on the Pine Ridge Reservation. His name is Reuben Fasthorse. And when I first knew him, elegant Native American man. Looked like he walked off the set of Dances with Wolves. When we were doing our military reenactments from the 1700s, he was doing recreations of dances from that era. So he lived with us for a while, he and his wife. And when I had my daughters, who are now 27, were young, they were 9 or 10. And he lived with us. They lived with us for a couple of months. And he started teaching them Lakota language. Ruben is a Lakota language revivalist. And he taught at New York University, I think it was. And as well this last year. So he was fun to have around, and he taught my girls things. I can't remember. Tata Hokshala. My daughters once came home from school and said there was some kid that was bullying them. And he said, they asked him, what can we call him in Indian? And so in Lakota Sioux, and he told them, no, you can take this one for free from the show tonight. He told them, you tell him he is a Tata Hokshala. Tata Hokshala. And it just pretty much meant softened down, it meant stupid boy. I think there was a little more meat to it than that. So they called this boy that, and he had no idea what they were saying. But he stopped bullying them. They called him Tata Hokshala, back off. So there you go. So that's what came to mind when I was reading the Lakota words for Wounded Knee Creek. Chankeopi Wakpala, the creek, Wounded Knee. So somewhere along this frozen stream, the heart of Crazy Horse had been buried in a secret place, because when he came to die, he said, "Bury my heart at Wounded Knee." And that's where the title of D. Brown's book came from, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. This was something that Crazy Horse had asked. And the ghost dancers believed that his disembodied spirit was waiting impatiently for the new earth that would surely come with the first green grass of spring. And folks, I think we're going to just barely, by the end of this segment tonight, get to the end of this. But at the cavalry tent camp at Wounded Knee Creek, the Indians were halted. They were carefully counted. There were 120 men and 230 women and children. So about half of that, in thirds, you could almost say. And because of the gathering darkness, Major Whiteside decided to wait until morning before disarming his prisoners. He assigned them a camping area immediately to the south of the military camp. He issued them rations. There was a shortage of teepee covers. He furnished them several tents. Whiteside ordered a stove placed in Bigfoot's tent because he was sick. And he sent a regimental surgeon to administer to the sick chief. To make certain that none of his prisoners escaped, the major stationed 2 troops of cavalry as sentinels around the Sioux teepees. And then he posted his 2 Hotchkiss guns on top of a rise overlooking the camp. And the barrels of these rifle guns, which could hurl explosive charges for more than 2 miles, were positioned to rake the length of the Indian lodges. So later in the darkness, the remainder of the 7th Regiment marched in from the they marched in from the east and quietly bivouacked north of Major Whiteside's troops. And it was Colonel James Forsyth, commanding Custer's former regiment, the 7th, now took charge of the operations. And he informed Whiteside that he had received orders to take Bigfoot's band to the Union Pacific Railroad for shipment to a military prison in Omaha. So, after placing 2 more Hodgkins guns on the slope beside the others, Forsyth and his officers settled down for the evening with a lot of whiskey to celebrate the capture of Bigfoot, such as it was. And the chief lay in his tent. He was too ill to sleep. He was barely able to breathe, even from their protective ghost shirts and their belief in the prophecies of this new Messiah, Wovoka. His people were fearful of the pony soldiers camped all around them. 14 years before, on the Little Bighorn, some of these very warriors had helped defeat some of these soldier chiefs. Moylan, Varnum, Wallace, Godfrey, Edgerly, and the Indians wondered if revenge would still be in their hearts. And it was. And so the following morning there was a bugle call, said Wasumaza, one of Bigfoot's warriors, who years afterward was to change his name to Dewey Beard. And then I saw the soldiers, he said, mounting their horses and surrounding us. It was announced that all the men should come to the center for talk, and after that talk they were to move on to the Pine Ridge Agency. And Bigfoot was brought out of his teepee and sat in front of his tent, and the older men were gathered around him and sitting right near him in the center. And after issuing hardtack for breakfast rations, Colonel Forsyth informed the Indians that they were now to be disarmed. They called for guns and arms, White Lance said. So all of us gave up our guns, and they were stacked in the center. Now, the soldier chiefs weren't satisfied with the number of weapons surrendered, and so they sent details of troopers to search the teepees. They would go right into the tents and come out with bundles and tear them open, Dog Chief said. They brought our axes, our knives, our tent stakes, and they piled them near the guns. And still not satisfied, the soldier chiefs ordered the warriors to remove their blankets and to submit to personal body searches for weapons. And the Indians' faces showed their anger. This would piss me off, too. You think TSA pisses you off? Imagine this. But only the medicine man, Yellow Bird, made any overt protest. He danced a few ghost dance steps, and he chanted one of the holy songs. That was his response. And he assured the warriors that the soldiers' bullets could not penetrate their sacred garments. The bullets will not go toward you, he chanted in Sioux. The prairie is large, and the bullets will not go toward you. And so the troopers found only 2 rifles. One of them was a new Winchester, belonging to a young Minneconjou named Black Coyote. Now, Black Coyote raised the Winchester above his head, shouting he'd paid much money for the rifle and that it belonged to him. And some years afterwards, Dewey Beard recalled that Black Coyote was deaf. If they had left him alone, he was going to put his gun down where he should. They grabbed him. They spinned him in the east direction. He was still unconcerned even then. He hadn't his gun pointed at anyone, and his intention was to put that gun down. They came on, grabbed the gun that he was going to put down, and right after they spun him around, there was a report of gunfire, which was quite loud. And I couldn't say that anybody was shot, but following that was a crash. And it sounded like the tearing of canvas. And something began to unfold which we now have no time left to talk about, which we'll hit tomorrow. The actual massacre at Wounded Knee. And I've got some pictures I'm going to show you as well. So here we are on Wounded Knee Creek with Bigfoot's band of about 300. And they're disarming them, the U.S. military. And shooting begins. We'll pick this up tomorrow. So I hate to end abruptly, but I have to for my time. So guys, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. I hate to leave you with that cliffhanger, but be back tomorrow and we'll finish this little section off. This has been the Intrepid Radio program, and thanks for being here. We'll see you in 23 hours.